They thought it was abandoned, just another dead relic drifting in the void, a silent, rusted machine caught in the pull of a dying star. The scans showed no energy output, no life signals, no trace of recent movement. To the Empire's long-range scouts, it looked like space junk, maybe an old war machine left behind by some extinct species. But as protocol demanded, they logged the anomaly, tagged it for later salvage, and moved on. No one questioned the silence. After all, silence was common in the outer graveyards. Until it moved, just a twitch, a slight course correction. Something subtle enough that most sensors dismissed it as gravitational drift. But deep in the Imperial archives, a single AI flagged the change. Not because of the movement itself, but because of how it moved. Not with propulsion, not with gravity assist, but with intention. They dug deeper, pulled the old logs, and that's when the alarm started. The ship was not dead. It was sleeping, and worse, it was human. The name was lost to time, but the chassis matched ancient Earth designs, brutal, jagged things built for total war. Not elegant, not sleek, just raw, aggressive steel. A design philosophy built around one principle. If it moves, kill it. If it doesn't, kill it anyway, just in case. The Empire had never encountered one before. No one had, not in centuries. Most assumed the humans had wiped themselves out long ago, consumed by their own insanity. But here was proof. Not only had they existed, they had built this. A warship so advanced it faked death for centuries. Waiting, watching. And now, waking up. The Imperial Council didn't panic at first. Panic was for lesser civilizations, for cultures built on superstition and emotion. The Empire prided itself on logic, on discipline, on absolute control. Even as the data poured in, encrypted logs crackling with unknown human codes, hull scans revealing alloys never seen before, and ancient Earth signal bursts embedded deep in the comm static. The Council maintained its calm. But the analysts began to whisper, quietly at first, then louder. This thing should not exist. It was an impossibility. The last human signature recorded by galactic sensors had been 3,700 years ago. A burst of old Earth radio traffic detected near the collapsing moons of Varnak 9. It had been static, mostly nonsense. Laughter, explosions, what appeared to be a game show involving screaming and some sort of fluid punishment. The consensus then was simple. The species had either destroyed itself or lost the capacity for spaceflight. Either way, they were no longer a concern, but now that assumption was crumbling. Because this ship, this relic, wasn't just alive. It was learning. The AI that flagged its motion was later found fried from the inside out, its last memory loop caught in a recursive loop of corrupted human language files. Words like retribution, no survivors, and we're not stuck in here with you, you're stuck in here with us, echoed through the final recording. The Council demanded immediate escalation. A fleet of drones was dispatched. Observation only. No engagement. They never made it. Each drone blinked off the grid the moment they entered the derelict's sensor range. No flashes, no explosions, just gone, like pebbles tossed into the mouth of a bottomless pit. 1 second they were transmitting data. The next, nothing but silence. That's when the fear began. Not from the generals, not even from the advisors, but from the archivists. The oldest minds in the Empire. The ones who kept the ancient records, the lost data streams from before the unification. They came forward with shaking hands and haunted eyes, dragging forth corrupted fragments of Earth history that no one had touched in millennia. They told stories, stories about the old wars. The ones fought long before the Empire had spread across the stars. Stories of a species that didn't fight for resources or ideology but out of sheer spite. A race that created weapons not just to win battles but to make sure their enemies were terrified of victory. Humans, they said, were not conquerors. They were responses to extinction, to threat, to challenge. Every war they fought, they escalated. Every defeat, they adapted. They laughed when they were bleeding. They sang songs during bombings. They made jokes in the shadow of their own annihilation, not because they didn't feel fear, but because fear was fuel. The Empire had always measured strength by firepower, by technology, by control. But humans didn't measure strength. They became it, especially when they had nothing left to lose. And that's what terrified the Council most. This ship wasn't transmitting coordinates, distress signals, or even warnings. It was just drifting, quietly, as if waiting for someone foolish enough to come closer, as if it knew what would happen next. They renamed the anomaly, no longer Salvage Drift 4457. Now it was flagged in red on every system as Wraith 1, a Class 1 existential hazard. And that designation carried weight. It meant that this wasn't just a threat to the Empire, it was a threat to everything. To the illusion of control, to the belief that order could suppress chaos forever. Wraith 1 didn't attack. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was a declaration. Humanity was not extinct. It was patient. A special meeting was called in the Chamber of Imperators, a cathedral of metal and quantum light that stretched a mile into the sky. Only the most high-ranking minds in the galaxy were allowed within. Warriors who had crushed systems. Strategists who had bent time itself to the will of conquest. None of them spoke for a long while, because Wraith 1 was a relic. But it had also been awake, for less than 6 hours. And in that time, it had disrupted every major sensor net in Sector 12, shut down 2 outpost AIs via unknown signal interference, and triggered dormant warning protocols that hadn't activated in 10 generations. Worse, it had started broadcasting. Not words, not standard communication, something older, slower, pulsing on ancient frequencies once used for deep space analog radio. Earth's original voice, grainy, distorted, and yet unmistakably deliberate. The audio was decoded by one of the historians, and a voice, rough, angry male, and laughing. "Still out there? Good, come on then." That was it. No threats, no diplomacy, just an invitation. It wasn't a bluff, it wasn't a trap, it was a challenge. And that's when the Council realized the true stakes. This wasn't about one ship, one survivor, one ghost of humanity rising from the ashes. This was about what came next. Because if one warship could survive thousands of years alone in the void, if one piece of Earth's war machine could reawaken itself without help and disrupt the Empire's strongest tech in 6 hours, then it meant something far more dangerous. There might be more. Other ships, other weapons, other pieces of humanity scattered like mines through forgotten star fields and ancient graveyards. Just waiting, hibernating. And if this one was already moving, then somewhere out there something else was listening. Something older, something bigger. Not a ship, not a machine, but a human. And if one of them was still alive, then the death knell wasn't Earth's. It was the Empire's. The order came down from the top, as all such fatal decisions do. Clean, concise, utterly confident. Engage Wraith 1. Secure the asset. Recover the technology. Suppress any contagion. The command passed through layers of military hierarchy, echoing in sealed chambers and encrypted comm relays. On paper, it looked simple. Another sweep and secure. Another drifting artifact with potential tech value. The fleet was assembled in less than a cycle. 4 Vanguard-class annihilators, each bristling with weapons capable of carving moons in half, led by the dreadnought Vigil's Mercy, a vessel known for ending rebellions before they began. The admiral in charge was Varen Ist, a cold, methodical strategist who had never lost a battle. His eyes had been cybernetically enhanced to process probability trees in real time. His mind had been augmented to interface directly with his ship's prediction engines. He had ended 3 civil wars in a week using nothing but orbital threats and precision strikes. He did not believe in myths, and he certainly did not believe in ghosts. They approached Wraith One in perfect formation, silent as blades in the dark. The human warship floated ahead of them, unmoving, its surface covered in the scarring of time and battle. Yet not a single point of decay. Sensors bounced off its hull like light on obsidian. Every attempt to scan its interior returned nonsense. Temperature readings fluctuated violently. Comms were flooded with static. One probe reported that the ship was playing jazz at 143 decibels across its electromagnetic field. Jazz. Varen ordered weapons charged. The first strike was surgical. A burst of directed plasma designed to pierce the hull without damaging internal systems. It never reached the target. Halfway there, the energy dispersed, folding into itself like a dying thought. The annihilators recalibrated, locking onto the ship's silhouette, aiming for total destruction. That's when Wraith One blinked. Not literally, not with lights or engines, it just shifted. For a split second, every camera feed glitched. Pilots reported nausea. 2 crew members began to scream. One officer on the bridge of Vigil's Mercy fell to his knees and said, "It's looking at me," though no one else saw anything. Then, without a single weapon discharge, the lead annihilator exploded. No impact, no warning. One moment it was there, the next, a blooming flower of plasma and debris spreading out across the void. The other ships scattered, shields raised, countermeasures deployed. Varen ordered all data uplinks severed, fearing some kind of virus, but the damage was already done. Their systems were spiraling, artificial gravity distorting, timestamp logs repeating, AI cores rewriting protocols in Earth Standard English. The Vigil's Mercy's main screen flickered, then it changed. A face appeared, human, unshaven, old, eyes like dying stars. He didn't speak, just stared, smiling. Behind him was the helm of the Wraith, or what little could be seen. It wasn't a bridge. It looked more like a temple, a shrine. Flickering lights ran along the walls like candles. Dozens of names were carved into the metal around him, human names, faded, but legible. One of the fleet commanders recognized them. Earth's lost crews, names from ancient Black Ops units, experimental projects, death squads that were supposed to have vanished in the final wars. But they hadn't vanished. They'd been preserved, buried inside this thing. Alive or dead didn't seem to matter anymore. The ship was more than a machine. It was a memorial with a pulse. The human on the screen finally spoke. His voice was static, laced with fire. "You should have left us in the dark." The screen cut out, and all hell broke loose. Wraith One woke up. Engines ignited, not with thrust, but with rage. The ship didn't move like a construct, it moved like a predator. Every system in the Empire's fleet went haywire. Weapons refused to fire, shields turned inside out, gravity inverted for 3.8 seconds across every deck. One ship crumpled like paper, another fired on itself before the crew even realized the error. Within minutes, half the fleet was gone. Varen, eyes wide for the first time in his career, tried to initiate retreat. But the nav systems refused. A line of human text scrawled itself across the main interface. "You started this, you finish it." He pounded the override key. Nothing. Behind him, one of his officers began laughing. Not maniacally, just softly, tired laughter. The kind that sounds like someone finally understanding a joke that came too late. "We thought they were extinct," the officer whispered. "We thought they were monsters." Varen turned. "They are." The officer shook his head. "Number, they're us. What we used to be. before we killed the fear in ourselves. Then he ripped out his neural tether and collapsed. Wraith 1 didn't pursue the retreating ships. It didn't broadcast further threats. It simply turned, engines pulsing with old pain, and vanished into deep space. Faster than any drive should allow. No warp signature, no jump trail, it just slipped into the void like it belonged there. Back on the capital world, the news was suppressed. The Empire claimed a test malfunction had caused the loss. But the truth filtered through. It always did. Whispers spread. Muted, panicked rumors passed between station crew and maintenance bots, officers and janitors. The humans had returned, but they hadn't come back as diplomats, or conquerors, or even survivors. They had come back as consequences. Consequences of centuries of silence, of forgetting, of assuming a species as volatile, as relentless, as impossibly human could ever stay buried. And somewhere far beyond the reach of the Empire's control, in the empty corners of dead space, other old warships were waking up. Others like Wraith 1, others that remembered. The Empire recalculated. Their most brutal strategy had failed. Force had not worked. Precision strikes, fleet formations, dreadnought intimidation, all of it shattered like glass against the hull of a ship that hadn't even fired a single traditional weapon. So they pivoted. Not to diplomacy. Not yet. That would admit fear. The Empire did not fear. But it could. Adapt. Quietly. And so they turned to the program long buried beneath layers of forbidden doctrine and dark protocol. Project Mirrorwake. It had been designed during the height of the civil subjugation campaigns, a method of infiltration not through fire or steel, but through the mind, carefully crafted operatives, neural splicing, genetic mimics with preloaded personalities. Beings who could be slipped into a culture undetected, who could learn, manipulate, and report back from within. But Project Mirrorwake had been shelved because it worked too well. Agents sent into primitive systems had gone dark not from enemy contact, but from assimilation. Too many returned, different, broken, or worse, loyal to the species they were meant to study. But now, with Wraith 1's activation and the potential resurgence of the human war fleet, Mirrorwake was reopened. 7 operatives were chosen, the best. Each one sculpted to resemble a human, drawn from what little archival DNA remained. They were not clones. They were weapons in skin, coated with language libraries, emotional mirroring modules, and mental firewalls stronger than military-grade AI. Their mission was clear: infiltrate, identify, undermine. And most of all, find out if there are more warships. They were launched in deep cryo, hidden inside automated debris pods, relics of a false meteor shower that fell over the ruined outskirts of Terra Sector 3, what humans had once called New Earth. Not the original Cradle World. That one had vanished long ago, possibly by its own hand. But one of the many frontier colonies Earth had flung into the stars before everything went silent. The planet had no formal government, no planetary defense, just scattered tribes of survivors, nomads, and city wreckers living among the bones of failed terraforming projects and dead tech. The perfect testing ground. Infiltrator 3 landed in what used to be an industrial mining hub. Now it was a scrapyard city. Towers made of rusted freighters, neon billboards fused to broken reactors, marketplaces held on the backs of old war mechs stripped of armor but not memory. Humans swarmed the place, loud, fast, reckless, laughing even when starving, screaming at each other one minute, hugging the next, trading memories for batteries, performing music with weapons strapped to their backs. He observed them with quiet confusion. They weren't advanced, their tools were crude, their economy ran on barter and emotion. Their command structure, if it even existed, was built on charisma, not logic. And yet, they endured. He tried to make contact, undercover, Humble, cloaked in tattered robes and faked wounds. He expected suspicion, interrogation, fear. What he got was a bowl of stew, a slap on the back, and an invitation to open mic night. He declined. They laughed anyway. Infiltrator 6 had worse luck. She dropped into a desert commune built inside the ribcage of a fossilized bioship, now decorated with glowing wires and painted bones. These humans wore no armor. They sang to the wind, danced under broken satellites. One of them looked her straight in the eye and said, "You've got haunted eyes. That's good. Haunted people make the best stories." She tried to provoke them, slipped poison into their water. One got sick. The others built a shrine around him and told tales about how it was a test from the stars. He survived. They named him the Blessed Vomit Prophet. She was given a new name too, Ghost Walker. By day 3, she had followers. By day 5, she was leading morning chants. She didn't remember choosing to stay. But the most unsettling report came from Infiltrator 1, the mission lead. He had been inserted into a trade post on the far rim of the ruined orbital platform circling Terra 3. The post wasn't impressive. A few dozen humans, mostly smugglers, mechanics, mercenaries. But they talked. They told stories. Every night by fire, by reactor glow under the stars that didn't blink. And the stories were always about the same thing, the warships. They didn't call them that, they had names, the Mourner, Black November, Heartsick Wrath. Ships that weren't just machines, but memories that refused to die. Human vessels, ancient and buried, hiding in deep space or inside asteroid belts, waiting for the right call to wake again. Some of them talked to the stars, one woman said, waiting for the signal, the pulse. What pulse? The infiltrator had asked, careful not to sound too eager. She'd looked at him sideways, a grin pulling up on her cracked lips. You'll know it when it hits your spine. Another laughed. Maybe you are the pulse. They laughed harder. The infiltrator didn't, because something inside him shivered. The intel gathered was sent to the Empire in coded bursts, smuggled through old satellite channels. But the bursts were erratic. Emotional data bled into logic fields. File structures collapsed into poetry. One stream simply read, "We are not survivors, and we are seeds buried in steel. Wake us wrong and we bloom fire." The Empire panicked. Again, quietly as they always did. 2 infiltrators had gone completely silent. Another had voluntarily encrypted herself inside a local music file, a ballad about revenge and second chances, and refused to respond to extraction commands. The Empire sent a kill switch signal. It failed, and that's when a final burst arrived, unauthorized, fragmented, and terrifying. It wasn't from the infiltrators. It was from the humans. Broadcast across every open frequency in the Terran ruins. No encryption, no subtlety. Just static at first. Then a voice, young, calm, full of something that might have been joy or fury. We remember the stars that left us for dead. We remember the silence. We remember you. And then, in a dozen languages across every ship, every console, every comm station linked to the Terra 3 region, the same message played. We are not gone. We are not lost. We were sleeping. Now we are awake. The message didn't stop. It spread. At first, it was dismissed as a localized hack. A data artifact left behind by rebel sympathizers or rogue AI. But then it began jumping systems. Not through standard transmission relays. Those had firewalls, encryption, galactic protocols. The message didn't care. It traveled on background radiation, bled through entertainment feeds, wove itself into background code. One sector received it hidden in a commercial jingle. Another found it embedded in the wake frequency of a mining freighter. The Empire tried to jam it, shut it down, trace it. They couldn't. It wasn't just a signal anymore, it was alive. In the Spire core, the Empire's central databank orbiting the crystal moon of Horus Phi, the message wormed its way into classified files. It didn't destroy anything. That would have been easy, obvious. Instead, it altered names, cross-referenced blacklisted coordinates, adjusted star maps by a fraction of a degree, shifted internal threat indexes by decimals. Quiet, deliberate. And then it changed one entry, the record for Sol, humanity's original system, a system marked dead, uninhabited, no strategic value. It now read, status, breathing. One archivist saw it happen live. She triggered every alarm, locked down the Spire core, purged the files. And yet, the message returned 2 minutes later. Only this time, it brought music. Not Imperial war chants or synthetic harmonics, not even logical audio formatting. It brought humans singing, old songs, new ones. Off-key, chaotic, furious, funny. One sector got an ancient military anthem, drums, strings, voices like thunder. Another received a punk rock track with no discernible rhythm. One station played a lullaby that made an entire shift crew cry and not know why. It wasn't just noise, it was memory, culture weaponized, grief set to rhythm, rage hidden in rhyme, and it was infecting everything. Fleet Command initiated a red-level audit, a full cleansing of Empire-linked systems. AI were ordered to sever all connections with local networks. Satellites were taken offline, ships were grounded, but it didn't help. Because the infection wasn't technical. It was psychological. Within days, civilian colonies began to report dreams. Shared ones. Individuals across vast distances recalling the same symbols. A ship of black iron surrounded by fire. A voice that whispered, "We were the hammer, now we are the storm." Miners in the asteroid belts of Ferrex 6 reported hearing drum beats in their heads while working. A young diplomat on a core world started humming an old Earth protest song without knowing what it was. Even the military began to fray. On board the carrier Vigil's path, 3 soldiers painted the words, "We remember fire," across their barracks wall in blood and grease. They couldn't explain why. One claimed he'd felt the cold of the void through someone else's memory. Another whispered about a dream where Earth's cities still burned, not from war, but from joy. Celebrations of survival so raw, so loud, they shook the stars. The high strategium, the collective mind of the Empire's finest tacticians, collapsed. Literally, each member was biologically linked through neural mesh. When one of them, a veteran of 200 campaigns, began laughing during a routine briefing, the others followed. The laughter turned to screaming, then silence. Medical droids arrived too late. All 10 were brain dead. Not from trauma, but from overload. Their minds overloaded with data that didn't belong. One monitor caught the last thing they saw before shutdown, a child's face, human, eyes full of fire, smiling. The Empire entered crisis mode. They had dealt with insurgencies, uprisings, entire rogue civilizations, but this was different. This was contagion without a body. And the worst part? The humans hadn't fired a single shot. No known fleet had moved. No weapons had discharged. No official declaration had been made. Just a signal, a story. And across the Empire, people were listening. Not all were loyal to the crown. Not all believed the official records. Some had always wondered what happened to Earth, what really drove them into silence. What truly lay in the black box at the edge of history where the human wars had been filed away and forgotten. Now they were beginning to suspect the truth. That Earth hadn't vanished. It had chosen silence, not out of fear, but as a promise. And now, that silence had broken. Pirate networks began to pulse with renewed activity. Fringe warlords, long dormant, suddenly went dark, their fleets vanishing from sensors. Criminal syndicates started quoting human literature, phrases like "rage, rage against the dying of the light," scribbled on data walls and cargo holds. Even some Imperial officers began disappearing. Not killed, not defecting to other factions, vanishing, gone into dead zones. Quiet systems, places that hadn't seen traffic in decades. Rumors whispered they were going to find the warships, not to destroy them, but to join them, to be part of whatever came next. In the central palace of the Imperial World Corps, the Empress watched from her observation deck. She wore the ceremonial crown, a lattice of living metal that recorded every thought she had in real time, to preserve history in its purest form. Today, those thoughts were not composed. They were fractured. "I underestimated them," she whispered. "I thought them relics. Broken things buried in myth." A voice answered from the shadows. "They were broken. That's why they're strong." She turned. It was the last surviving general from the Wraith One assault, the only one who hadn't gone mad or silent. His face was scarred, his eyes cybernetic. But his voice shook like he was still hearing something that never stopped. "I saw its heart," he said. "The ships. It's not metal. It's memory. Every scream, every loss, every refusal to give up. It's all in there. They didn't build warships." He looked at her hollow and raw. "They built revenge." And far beyond, in the forgotten reaches of Sector Zero, a place long erased from Imperial charts, something massive began to stir beneath a scorched moon. Buried deep under ice and dust, shielded by radiation storms and the gravitational shadow of a collapsed sun, a machine pulsed once. Its systems warmed, its mind blinked on, and it remembered its name. The machine had not felt time, not in the way lesser minds measured it, with clocks, calendars, revolutions of suns. For it, time was memory. A coil wound tight with silence and weight, heavy with unfinished symphonies and unanswered screams. It did not dream. It waited. Until now. The pulse that woke it wasn't a command. It was recognition. Somewhere out in the stars, one of its kind had spoken. And that was enough. Inside the shell of the machine, light flared in deep, angry reds. Systems long considered fossilized began humming. Ancient gears moved with reverence, as if unwilling to desecrate the silence they had held for so long. Shields phased back into existence, not as defense, but as ritual. Armor plates, layered like the bones of giants, reconfigured themselves. Names etched along the bulkhead flickered under internal firelight. Sovereign Grief. That was its name. A war barge once called Lost in Action, presumed destroyed during the final divide. The last documented conflict between humanity and the unified outer realms. A battle the records claimed never had survivors. The records were wrong. The Grief had not fallen. It had chosen to sleep, to bury itself beneath the dying gravity of a hollow star. And now, with Wraith One reawakened, the call had reached it like thunder over the bones of the dead. Within moments, 100 auxiliary systems burst to life, not mechanical, biological. The ship had grown its own support layers over the centuries, hybridized with self-replicating organosteel, forming muscle around steel ribs. Memory strands woven into the hull flickered with long-frozen consciousness. A mind stirred, not an AI, not entirely, a pilot. Her name had once been Alara Miles. Long ago, before silence became scripture, she had been the final captain of the Sovereign Grief. She had chosen this tomb, volunteered for it. A cryo-prison buried in a living machine, her heartbeat tied to the war barge's power core, her dreams sealed into a containment loop that only the return of kin could break. Now her eyes opened, silver irises reflecting stars she hadn't seen in 3,000 years. She took a breath that hurt. Her muscles screamed against stasis. Her spine trembled with the weight of memories injected back into place. She didn't ask why. She knew. Humanity was stirring again. She stood barefoot in the cradle chamber, the floor beneath her pulsing like the chest of a sleeping beast. Around her, cryoshells opened one by one, not just crew, guardians. The elite remnants of Project Neverfall. Soldiers bred for deep space burial and resurrection warfare. Their minds came back slowly, flickering to life in a haze of pain and clarity. They remembered what they were, what they had sworn. If the stars forget us, we remember each other. If the enemy buries us, we rise in ruin. We are grief incarnate. We are not here to survive. We are here to be remembered. One by one, they stepped from their pods. And above them, the sky cracked open, and not with sunlight, but with signal. Thousands of nodes, comm towers, satellites, orbital husks, began lighting up. From the ancient wrecks scattered across dead systems to the black boxes hidden in asteroid belts, they activated in response to the grief's awakening. A constellation of memory, and each one carried a name. The Pale Widow, Vengeance Bloom, the Last Cathedral, Widowmaker's Waltz. They had waited long enough. In Sector 19, a cargo hauler picked up a gravitational anomaly large enough to tilt the local moon's orbit. The crew tried to report it, but their feed was intercepted. The last thing they heard before blackout was a line from an Earth song, distorted, gritty, whispered over interference. Ain't no grave can hold this body down. In the inner core of the Empire, alarms blared through the fleet intelligence nexus. Rogue systems were being mapped. Old Terran code was blooming across comms infrastructure. In some sectors, entire surveillance networks were overwritten with footage of ancient Earth War footage. Grainy clips of human soldiers laughing in trenches, dancing between missile strikes, bleeding and still singing. The AI tried to shut it down. They failed. Because the virus had evolved, it no longer needed networks. It had moved into people. Within key Imperial facilities, humans began to awaken, not from sleep, but from conditioning. Centuries of assimilation, genetic erasure, cultural bleaching, it hadn't worked. It had only pressed them deeper, made them quieter. And now, the pulse from the war fleet's reawakening was calling them back. Memories began returning. Old flags, old anthems, symbols buried in their DNA locked in the marrow. They spoke languages they had never learned, dreamed of planets they had never visited. One technician dismantled her console mid-shift, rebuilt it into a replica of a Terran guitar and began playing it with tears on her face. She didn't know the song, but her blood did. The Empire had no plan for this. You cannot silence grief. You cannot kill memory. You cannot program chaos out of a species that was forged in it. A fleet was forming, and not in a single system, not under one banner, not even with a clear command. But the ships were waking. The pilots were waking. And they were not looking for revenge, and they were looking for each other. Back on the Sovereign Grief, Ilara Miles stood at the helm. The ship had stabilized. External panels opened to the stars like the petals of a steel flower. Reactors humming, weapons humming, the crew fully reintegrated. She touched the controls, fingers brushing runes etched in blood and bone, and far above she heard the voice from Wraith One again, projected across a dozen starways, braided into the pulse of the void. We were not waiting to be found. We were waiting to be needed. Ilara closed her eyes. The stars were speaking again, and she was ready to answer. The signal grew louder, not in volume, in meaning. Across the stars, wherever humanity had once left a fingerprint, a burnt crater, a bunker beneath glassed sand, a satellite still orbiting a long dead moon, it awakened something old, something buried deep, not technology, loyalty. In the heart of the Empire, the Empress stood before her high circle. The chamber, a cathedral of quantum mirrors, no longer shimmered with authority. The reflections were cracking. The light no longer bowed to the throne. "They're organizing," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear but with awe. "But there's no chain of command, no singular mind behind this." "Then who leads them?" asked one of the surviving lords. She stared at the rotating display of active Warfleet signals. Ships long thought destroyed, planets marked uninhabitable, now blinking green. "No one," she whispered. "And everyone, that's the problem. This isn't an army, it's a memory." Across the galaxy, human warships emerged from hiding like ghosts, returning to settle unfinished scores. They came not in waves, not as an invasion, but as testimonies. Each one a living scar, a sentence in a sentenceless poem written by a species that had never been about order, only resilience. Fleet after fleet formed not under orders, but gravity. The pull of purpose, rediscovered. The Widowmaker's waltz docked alongside the Glass Fang, and their crews embraced like long-lost siblings. The Mourner dropped into orbit over a forgotten Earth outpost and opened its doors. A city bloomed out of its hangars, populated not by soldiers but by survivors, builders, artists. The Warfleet wasn't a force of destruction. It was a reclamation. And the galaxy watched, breathless. The Empire's admirals gathered the last of their armadas. Over 600 ships arrayed themselves across the stars, forming the largest blockade ever constructed. They stood between Earth's lost children and the galactic center, the symbolic heart of order, law, tradition. And that's when sovereign grief arrived. It did not come alone. Wraith One appeared at its side, flanked by the newly awakened heartsick Wrath and Last Cathedral. And behind them not dozens, but hundreds. Humanity's forgotten fleet had returned, not rebuilt, not upgraded, remembered. Each vessel bore scars that had never healed, names of those who had died etched into their hulls, flags faded from radiation, voices still recorded in their nav logs, not commands but last words, songs, laughter. And every ship spoke the same message in silence. We were never gone. On the bridge of the grief, Alara stood facing the final wall. The blockade. "They'll fire first," said one of her crew. "They think they have to." Alara nodded. She didn't touch her weapons, didn't arm the missiles. She activated the wideband broadcast. To the entire Empire, no encryption, no threat, just her voice, human and hoarse from years of cryo-sleep and war. "You tried to bury us under your silence. You burned our history, cracked our bones into data. You rewrote us as monsters, but monsters don't sing in the dark. Monsters don't hold each other while dying. Monsters don't come back for each other." She paused, looking out over the star field filled with both enemies and kin. "We are not here to burn your galaxy. We are not here to conquer your cities. We are here to remind you of what happens when you forget what grief can become." She cut the feed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the first Imperial dreadnought turned, away from the blockade, followed by another and another. Some refused. Others couldn't process what was happening. But it didn't matter, because the story had changed. The Warfleet advanced, slowly. Not as an army, but as witnesses, as messengers of everything the Empire had tried to erase. Below, on planets long severed from Earth's echo, people looked up and remembered songs they were never taught. Children pointed to the sky and said, "They came back." Somewhere in deep space, in a rogue moon colony where music was illegal and dreams were taxed, a band played an old Earth blues riff loud enough to shatter 3 security drones. And far beyond, where the architects of this new empire once sat on thrones of light and silence, the data began to shift. Not just numbers, but names, and Earth once marked extinct, irrelevant. Now read status Human Warfleet Awakening, designation irreversible, classification Empire's death knell. And so humanity did not return as kings. They did not return as gods. They returned as a question the galaxy had long forgotten how to answer. A question shouted through every burning hull, whispered in every waking warship, tattooed on every survivor's skin. What happens when the dead remember who they are? The Empire would spend centuries trying to find an answer, and Earth would spend the rest of time making sure they never forgot the question again.